Hello, everybody, and welcome back to A Better Life New York. We're here with Chris Junior, and we're doing on our way to part two of our series of looking back at and present of David Berkowitz, the son of Sam. How are you, Chris?
I'm well. How are you?
I'm good. So last time we pretty much went through a timeline of the shootings. We dove into a little bit of the strangeness of certain things. But now we're at a point where, in the story, where David Berkowitz arrested, and everybody's saying to themselves, then as well as today, who actually is David Berkowitz? And Chris is going to go into a little bit of his background from the beginning to what we think, what we know, what we've been told, and what many people have been told in conversations with him, as well as a lot of questions that we still have.
Yeah, and I think the short answer really is something that my therapist would say to me when I ask him questions about other people, what
Who
they're thinking.
do you think you are?
No, he goes, it's complicated. People are complicated. David Berkowitz is a very complicated person. He has been his entire life. And I think what I was trying to underscore in the last episode to an extent was that there is David Berkowitz, and then there's all these other creations of David Berkowitz. Some are created by David Berkowitz himself. Some are created by Maury Terry, who wrote The Ultimate Evil. Other personas created by David Berkowitz are other writers and authors who have written books and spoken publicly about David Berkowitz, essentially. So I think one of the most complicated things about complicated people like David Berkowitz is who was the real David Berkowitz,
Right.
right? So I think
We
in
have
order to get
facts,
there,
we
what's
have
that?
facts, and we have perceptions,
Exactly.
right?
Exactly. And by all means, I've spent some of this is my perception. I trust my own instincts more than I trust somebody else's instincts, is what I've learned.
Right.
And, you know, I think as we go through his timeline, which is more or less created through all of these different opinions anyway, and a lot of what he has said since he's been arrested, you kind of find some truth in who he is. And that's what I kind of want to talk about today. There's some really interesting tidbits in here, but, I think some of this is going to be news, some of it's not. David Berkowitz was born in June of 1953. He had a vowel at the end of his name when he was initially born, Richard David Falco. I remember when I first found that out, I was like, oh, wow, he was half Italian, or he was Italian. He really wasn't. He was born to a young lady. Her last name was Broder, Elizabeth Broder. She was having an affair with a married businessman named Joseph Kleinman. And basically immediately after birth, she put David up for adoption. And that's how he became a Berkowitz. He lived in the Stratford Avenue area of the Bronx. The name Falco comes from Betty's estranged husband, who was Tony Falco, and more or less has absolutely no relationship, I guess, family-wise with, there's no DNA, it was an affair. And I think part of that gets sewn into the tapestry of the serial killer, David Berkowitz. Does that make sense to you?
Absolutely.
Okay. So, he goes from, he goes through childhood, you know, there's this creation that we've been told, I think, he was a troubled kid. He was, a loner. He felt different and less attractive than other kids. He was bullied. There's claims of him being tormented by monsters, and there's these allegations, or by his own words, actually, he starts talking about how he, drugged his mother's parakeet. He was a serial arsonist, and I guess those kind of get drawn up as disturbing behaviors. I think what a lot of people don't know is a lot of that information came from I guess he was a psychotherapist or some sort of a head doctor, this Dr. Abrahamson. David Berkowitz, when he was arrested, New York City law enforcement, district attorneys, prosecutors, whatever, brought in this guy Abrahamson to speak with Berkowitz. Abrahamson was, I guess, pretty well known. He wrote in the early 70s, The Mind of a Murderer or The Murdering Mind, where he more or less starts to create this profile for what a murderer or a serial killer would do. He covered Oswald in pretty great length, and he was very popular. So New York City decides to bring him in. Berkowitz and him start to talk. They become chummy. Berkowitz wants a book written about him. He was very, very, I think, upset about Klausner's book. I don't think he liked the way that he was portrayed. There are a significant amount of letters between David Berkowitz and Nat Berkowitz, his adopted father, who basically Berkowitz is like, I need you to talk to this guy Abrahamson. He's going to write a much better book about me. It's going to be great. Like he's trying to get some version of the story out there that probably embarrasses his family a little bit less than the original book. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, I mean, my problem is this. My problem is how, what makes you think that David Berkowitz ever could or would tell the truth about anything? I mean, the guy was a murderer.
100%.
And he tells you he took orders from a dog.
100%. So
I mean, he may be telling you the truth that he believes on that moment.
Right. And I think what really happens here is we kind of see that evolution happening when it comes to the dog. He was never getting orders from a dog. He had to look like a psychopath. He had to, in order to justify these murders and maybe take some of the guilt away from other people that could have been involved or known about what was going on during the time period of the murders. So you got all these variations of stories. At the same time he's talking to Abrahamson, and this is why it's I believe there's some truth to what makes someone angry enough to kill, right? He's telling Abrahamson one thing, right? He's giving him everything he wants to know. He's read his books. He's giving him the profile he wants, that he's comfortable with. But at the same time, during that same exact time period, he's talking to Maury Terry about the occult and the 22 disciples of hell, and he's filling in all the blanks from all these letters that he sent out. Well, not all the letters, but the Breslin letter for one, and this whole program to kill thing, which could come from something totally different. But there are pieces of the truth scattered, and if you could put that puzzle together, and you can kind of get a picture that David Berkowitz wasn't a psychopath, knew exactly what he was doing it for good reason. And a lot of what he was doing that was half truths or full truths and complete lies was to kind of bury the system with enough bullshit. Excuse my language. If we have to take that out, I apologize.
Don't worry about it.
That nobody really knows what the hell happened. Now, even I have issues with some of the stuff he said to Maury Terry and some of the stuff that Maury Terry has reported in his own books. I think some of that stuff is complete fantasy. So ultimately, I think it's more for confusion than anything.
Right.
I think a lot of it
bury the truth you bury the tree in the forest.
Exactly. But if you start looking at his growth, which we're going to get more into, obviously, there are little tidbits in there of, wow, that is kind of a contradiction of the profile they're building up, or wow, why is David Berkowitz? How is David Berkowitz in the same area as this person, right? How is David Berkowitz connected to that, and how is he there? Like there's too many coincidences that lead me to believe and have, I guess, gotten me charged to an extent where it doesn't add up. It just doesn't add up that David Berkowitz was just this perfect serial killer, the way like they manufactured presidents back in the day, like just like he just fits in this box, perfect little box.
Well, I think too, when you have somebody that's created, especially a professional, and you have it all the time, a psychological professional, where he writes a book and says, "This is what serial killers are," and then he goes interviews Berkowitz. He wants it to be a self-fulfilling prophecy that
Right.
what he described before is true everywhere. And I think in any investigation, and especially this one is someone and something complex, in an era where we didn't track everybody's living and breathing moment, I think you have this. You're only seeing a little blip of the picture, right? You have a person that obviously, as any of us would say, there's something wrong with, right? You don't go
Exactly.
out and shoot total strangers for no reason whatsoever. And there has to be some basis. And it seems like we have gotten a cornucopia of reasons. You could
Right.
say he's the troubled serial killer. You could say he's involved with the occult. You could say that he's been programmed in certain ways to kill people.
Right.
You could say all these different things, and none of them could be true, or they all could be true.
Right. And you exactly. And when you dig a little bit deeper into Abrahamson, right? You know, we talk about Program to Kill. I know you've covered MKUltra. I know you've covered JFK. I love a good conspiracy theory. I think a lot of people these days loves a good conspiracy theory, and I think what we're finding over time is that there's more and more truth to things that were considered conspiracy theories 20, 30 years ago than they are conspiracy theories now. In other words, like, 40, when Oliver Stone put out the JFK movie, right? There was, I mean, I think a lot of people could, by that point, probably knew that there was something not exactly right in that whole story, right? But there was still enough people saying that this is garbage. Oswald killed Kennedy. He got caught, and the rest is history. Were weird things going on at that time? Sure, but there was really no real conspiracy. The United States government and the mafia and the CIA and Cuba and all these Russia and all these different did not conspire to kill JFK. Right now, I guess we're in 2025, headed very closely to 2026, and people are
Yeah.
like, well, I don't know anymore. Like, it almost feels like JFK was like that. Everything that everyone's been saying since the 70s, 80s, and early 90s is kind of true. Like,
It's the model of all things, of all assassinations we have ever seen, that they came up with this model and they used it throughout history. The new one's going to be Roger Stone's book is going to come out about the attempted assassination of Ronald Reagan. It's
right.
going to go deep into how that happened.
And I'm looking forward to it.
Me too.
Because I do like these things, and I can understand if someone thinks I'm crazy. But you talk about Program to Kill. I'm kind of jumping ahead a little bit in some respects, but Abrahamson covered Oswald in, I think, in a big way. And again, that's kind of part of the reason why New York City brought him in to speak with Berkowitz. He'd cover murderers, assassinations, things like that, and kind of profile them. And
Okay. So
and
let's go back to his life a little bit.
we will, but this is important, because
All right.
we're on the topic, and it is
All right, go ahead.
in The Murdering Mind, right? Abrahamson wrote about Oswald. He said, you know, basically, he described Oswald as a man driven by feelings, inadequacy, resentment, and a need for recognition, who sought to make a dramatic statement through violence. Abrahamson rejected the idea of a larger conspiracy, instead of viewing the assassination as the act of a disturbed individual seeking meaning and fame. Ultimately, you know, if we believe in conspiracy theories and we're looking back at JFK and all this other stuff, Abrams is the perfect guy to bring in. I mean, he's the guy that's supposed to bring the clarity to the table, I guess, right? And make you believe that it's a duck, He
Right.
just
It's made to create a story that becomes the lowest common denominator that makes it easily digested for the American public.
exactly.
So it's the simple, it's the, Occam's razor. The simplest story is sometimes the true, right? The simplest
Yes.
fact is probably the truest one. So, I mean, it's easy to understand that a crazy guy picks up a rifle and tries to kill somebody. It's easy to understand that they want notoriety. It's easy to understand that they had a troubled life and didn't know how to do it. It's easy to understand that somebody wants to use their frustration and programs itself and tries to settle that through violence, where
Exactly.
normal people, or I shouldn't say normal because none of us are really normal, there is no such thing.
Right. Oops,
And
my
the
bad.
and the easy part is to believe that where we would go out and try to educate ourselves or try to get a new job or try to learn some new skill, he reduced it to violence because his frustration only channeled that way because his mind didn't work correctly.
Right.
So that's easy for a person to understand. Plus, it sells magazines, it sells newspapers, and it
Sure.
sells books.
Right.
Saying the government is behind the whole thing and we don't know how it worked doesn't sell anything
Right. Exactly. And, you know,
except podcasts.
right. Exactly. So in 1967, something major does happen in Berkowitz's life that I think would affect anybody. I think he was 14 years old at the time. His adopted mother dies,
Right.
and his father and him, I would say they had a relationship that strained as a result, and I think this could be true for anyone, right? I mean, husband loses his wife, son loses mother. There's no feminine counterbalance in the home, and that's going to take a toll on anyone. My mom is sick, and at 40 years old, it's hard for me to reconcile, because you grew up knowing this vibrant woman, and you thought she was always going to be there, and she's not the same anymore. It affects you at any moment in your life. I couldn't even begin to imagine what my life would be like if I lost my mother at 14. I'm sorry. I just, and I had to deal with
Yeah.
Chris
It's
Senior
difficult.
only. But
I know his father very well, so I appreciate that.
yeah, so it's just, it's definitely something that I think could create some hurt and anger in your heart, and that could sit around for a while, but in 1967, his father decides he's going to move, and they end up in Co-op City, 1967. I believe at the time Co-op City was a new development in the Bronx, so it wasn't like it was
Absolutely.
like I,
Because Freedom Land used to be there. It was an
okay,
amusement park. I used to go there as a very little kid. And when they tore it down and put Co-op City there, I was pissed.
right. I've actually heard that now that I'm thinking about it. Freedom Land.
I have pictures if you want to see.
I'd love to see him eventually. The area of Co-op City at that time, I think, was pretty good. I don't know if it's great now, but I know it was pretty good back then.
And this idea of building these gigantic apartment buildings was revolutionary to New York City.
Gotcha. I did the survey work there many years ago. It was that was an interesting project. That place is sinking too nowadays. But
Oh,
anyway,
look where it's built. What a shock. I remember I was supposed to do an arbitration there. So they had charged I think about Berkowitz. I don't know, one of the board terminated one of the workers, a custodian or a maintenance person in the building, and he came back with a gun and killed two of them. So
Jesus,
obviously the arbitration wasn't necessary.
wow.
But yeah, it's not it's an interesting place. It's large. I mean, I remember many, many years ago in the 70s, I had a friend that built uh, vending machines that were theft proof.
Right.
He would take them and then he would armor plate them. And his biggest client was Co-op City because they used to get broken into all the time in the
Right.
70s. We're talking.
Yes. This, I think, is a pretty big milestone in the life of David Berkowitz. I think the move to Co-op City kind of is kind of where you see the contradictions about who David Berkowitz was, who we want him to be, and who we're told he's supposed to be. There's a lot of, it's just, it doesn't really add up. This is where things don't add up, essentially. And it's also pretty important because there were things going on in that area that I think introduced Berkowitz to the realm of, the new age type stuff, the magic with a K, not with a C.
But to realize, so now he's alone, right? He has his
No,
father who
he's, yeah,
he doesn't confide in
right.
like his mother. So he's looking for, as every child or every person does, looks for relationships. I mean, I think that's natural that you become a sponge. So where your environment
Yeah.
is where or people you meet, whether it's working, whether I see right here that his IQ was 118, which is not ridiculously high, but it's not ridiculously low either.
No.
Um, I mean, he's not a genius. This is 130. I think it's the genius level. Um,
But
he has
he's,
an aptitude for baseball. That's interesting.
yeah, so he's actually a sports fanatic. He could talk about sports all day, from what I understand. I've never sat down and talked to him. I know several people who have, and he's definitely a sports fanatic for sure. I think one of the reasons why Maury Terry and him got along so well was they spoke very often about the New York Giants and football. But he was also a baseball guy as well, still is, I think, from what I gather. But it's in this part of his life where things aren't matching up. They're trying to say he was like this socially awkward guy who couldn't make friends, had all this teenage angst from his mother dying and his father, dating again, and you know he didn't really love the dynamic of that, and he's just this monster in the making at this time. And I think to an extent some of that is true, but for different reasons. And I also think there's some heavy contradictions there, because it's during this time where he makes a lot of friends with the neighborhood kids. He joins the auxiliary police department. He's involved with the local patrol, the fire patrol people. He's getting involved in the community, but at the same time withdrawn. It doesn't make sense. Maybe you have a perspective that can change my mind, but I've had the
How old is he right now?
he's like between, let's say, early high school years,
Right.
early high school type stuff, end of middle
So
school.
think about it. I mean, just because you join these groups and go
Yeah.
with these groups, somehow you may still always feel different than them
Eh,
because you're adopted, right?
Right.
Because you're different. I remember where I grew up, everybody was rich. My father worked in a factory, my mother worked in a cafeteria. So we weren't rich. And my friend had, his father was in his 70s worth $400 million. So, I mean, so even though I was at all the parties, even though I was doing all the things that we worked for his father's company together, even though those things were gone, I always felt different than everybody else.
I think that is a real feeling for anybody that age. And what I mean by that
I
is,
agree. I agree. Adolescent fear.
right. And I think that everyone is trying to find ways to fit in. I think, I, I'm going to just talk about myself. I know I'm a decent looking guy. I've had some success in my life. I don't think I'm much different today than I was 30 years ago, though. You know what I mean? And I think I have all the same, I feel like the same person. I obviously have grown and matured, but back then, I was a starting running back on the football team. I didn't think I was good at football. I always thought I sucked. but I was the starting running back. I carried the ball 20 times a game in midget football. How can I have been bad if I'm getting the ball? You know what I
Right.
mean?
Right.
I never felt comfortable around women until I was much older. When looking back, there was probably like 10 girls that probably wanted to go to the dance with me, right? But I didn't have the guts to ask because I didn't have the guts to handle the rejection, right? So, we all go through these things as adolescents. I just don't believe that is, the makeup of a serial killer.
So that, right. So there's something that they're arguing takes those frustrations to violence, right? Where we don't
Right.
make same kind of crap. We don't make those judgments. We
Right.
don't make those jumps. We don't think how we saw. No matter how frustrated we are as teenagers, women, beauty, friends, we all know what goes on. We see, bullying, those things in today's world. We never make the jump to violence.
Right.
So the question is, in this case, and he's not at that point yet, but what makes him make that jump to violence if he made it at all?
I don't. At this point in the story of David Berkowitz, I still don't see it. But again, I'm going off of my own opinion, and it's fair if someone doesn't agree with me. Nonetheless, there was a lot of stuff going on in Co-op City at that time. You had the that I guess that America we were kind of talking about, a new development, young families, auxiliary police, people involved with the community. Maybe that America that we remember from when we were kids, or that type of thing. But there were also people that were living there that were a little
Dude,
bit different and a part of that counterculture that was coming in.
you say when we were kids, dude, I
You're
bet you I
much
have
older than me. I realize that.
25 years on you. How old are you?
I'm 40.
Yeah, well, I'll take it back. I have 26 years on
Right.
you. So,
And I say that the way I say it, and I think someone 10 years younger than me is going to say it in their own way, and I think you're going to say it in your own way, but I think we have this, I think people tend to have this this affinity for when they were growing up. Things were a little bit easier. So I guess maybe that's where that comes from. I don't know. But I think that the world was, you know, I guess there was still some of that old school America that you see in the movies and you see in the TV shows, like the Wonder Years almost. Does that make sense?
well, the Wonder Years were the time I grew up.
Yeah.
So, yes, it really was. So I really, there were so many things in that show that reminded me. Obviously, he had a lot easier. I mean, but I remember my dad being like him at time. I mean, like
Yeah.
my dad when he originally drove a laundry truck when we were really little, and he would come home from work, and we would watch Combat and Rawhide and like these war shows that every man who was in the war watched.
Right. And I'm happy you brought that up because it kind of gets to this counterculture that was kind of in that area at that time, or a part of that counterculture. The Vietnam War was going on during this time period.
Correct.
And there were a lot of people that got drafted. I'm sure there were a lot of people that signed up to just go be a part of the war effort. I'm sure that we know that there were people in protest, but there were people who just didn't want to go. And, we're in the 21st century. People that subscribe to homosexuality and things like that, people that are that have a different sexual orientation, we don't really care about that anymore. I don't. It doesn't mean anything to me. What you do, with your relationships is what you do, and I'm going to do what I do, and that's it. And we respect one another.
Freedom.
Right. During that time period,
yeah,
you couldn't do that. It was a totally different ballgame. So there were two guys in that area at that time, one with the last name Pratsky and the other with the last name Lavenda. They went to the same high school that Berkowitz went to, but they were a little bit older. Both of those men were very much into ceremonial magic, mysticism, things of that nature. And they also happened to be homosexuals, right? Closeted, very much so. They devised a plan to get out of the war effort. There were two real reasons why you couldn't go get drafted or go fight in Vietnam. And I think maybe there was a little bit more, but I think the two big ones were like you physically couldn't do it, and even in some cases, I guess that probably didn't didn't stop the government from sending you over there. But if you were if you were becoming a priest or something to that effect, or involved in some sort of a religious organization. So what these two gentlemen did was they became bishops on the Eastern Orthodox Church. And if you look back in that time period in history, there was a thing called wandering bishops. One of the most famous wandering bishops was David Ferry, who was very much involved in the JFK assassination conspiracy plot.
And we know that Ferry had long ties with the CIA.
Yes.
And he was one of the greatest pilots that they ever had working for them in history, right?
Exactly. And it's here and that I believe Berkowitz got his first advance into some of the occult type stuff through Pratsky and Lavenda, or maybe just Pratsky, being around Co-op City, hanging around, riding his bike, getting into the woods where they would have these seances and do all this weird stuff that, I would say 95 or 98% of Americans and the world probably aren't into, you know what I mean? They had it's a very well known thing. They used to call this guy Pratsky's father like the gnome of Co-op City. He had this little auto body shop and he built this church, and the son became a bishop and Lavenda became a bishop. They actually got their, in order to become a bishop, you have to go, it goes all the way back, I think, to like St. Peter or St. Paul, right? So there was a schism in the church, the Catholic, the Roman Catholics and the Eastern Orthodox. One of these bishops that was in Ukraine. There was a war going on there, whatever it was. He got thrown out of Ukraine. He ended up in the United States in Harlem. These guys meet him, and he basically makes him a bishop. So they have the record going all the way back. So now they're in. They start their church, and guess what they get to do? They get to avoid going to the Vietnam War. Ultimately, they're in the same area as Berkowitz. And I think Berkowitz at some point gets engaged with these guys and learns a lot of this esoteric type stuff that, may have not meant much then, but means a lot more later on in life.
So how long was he around them or with them, or what do we know for sure?
What we know for sure is that Berkowitz had mentioned to multiple people that, he observed these seances and stuff like that in and around Co-op City. And there were no names given at that time, but there was this totally separate book written called Dead Names, which basically is a story of another book called the Necronomicon, the Finding of the Necronomicon, which is
I know what it is. Yeah.
Okay. So,
well, explain it to everybody else.
So the Necronomicon is like a it's like a almost like a, how's the word? It's almost like a mythical tale that you would hear or read in like the Old Testament, right? It's supposed to go back to Sumer or one of those original civilizations, and kind of talks about, a lot of stuff that is so wild. I don't even really understand it. You know what I'm saying? Like,
right. But it has to do with death too, right?
Yeah, death. And it's like a grimoire is what they would call it. And, they believe that this book had a lot of power. And, it kind of talks about how, the spirits can take you over, and it's all this weird stuff. I just don't subscribe to it. I don't believe in it. It's not something that, I really spend a lot of time on. But essentially, in this book written by a pseudonym called Simon, who's actually Peter Lavenda, they talk about Pratsky and his relationship to some of the other people that David Berkowitz is involved with. And it kind of comes into picture as we get through becoming an adult. So after high school, David Berkowitz really doesn't have much going on. You know, his father's remarrying or remarried at the time, and you know, he decides he's actually going to enlist in the army. And he ends up in Korea in 71, 72, that time period.
And how old is he then?
I guess he's 18 at the time.
Right.
During this
South
time period, what's that?
South Korea and the DMZ that still exists today, right?
Exactly. So, I mean, again, it kind of shows his willingness to put himself in a lot of very, social interactions. And I kind of touched on this with the auxiliary police, but again, he's enlisting in something to be around people. I realize he doesn't have much going on, and maybe that's probably a last-ditch effort to make something out of himself, right? Maybe to make him, feel better about his position in society. I don't really know, but, he goes to Korea. And I think what he does in Korea is kind of akin to what anyone in that time period would be doing, in another country as a, late teens, early 20s type guy.
It's funny that he joins the army and he doesn't go to Vietnam, that he goes to Korea.
Yeah. He experiments with LSD and other drugs. He doesn't have anything that spectacular happen while he's in Korea, but, he does it. And when he comes back, he ends up in Fort Knox. And I think while he's in Fort Knox, another layer gets added to him. He is in a behavioral health facility there.
So what's interesting, that if he was prone to violence and he was in the infantry in the army in South Korea, and believe me, for those who weren't alive during that period, or at least weren't of age, the tensions between South and North Korea never really subsided after the war. And during Vietnam, they were incredibly tense in that peninsula where Vietnam and Korea and China was. And a lot of China fed into the North Koreans and fed into the threat. I mean, you know the story. There's something like 3 million North Korean soldiers and like 40,000 American soldiers on the DMZ. And it would seem to me that if I was that frustrated and had a propensity to do something and wanted to do some violent act, while I had a rifle and bullets, maybe a perfect time to do that when I was in South Korea.
Right.
It would seem like if I was going to choose to kill somebody and I was that frustrated, this would be the moment, right? Where you could do something that could have a monumental effect. I mean, if you were ever with the DMZ, there are soldiers and mirrors just who walk back and forth. I mean, to fire a bullet across and kill somebody could start a whole war if you really want to make a name for yourself. So there are many ways that if the person we want to believe was at the time of the killings existed in South Korea during that time period with a weapon in an infantry, he may have had some large effects. Obviously, he knew how to shoot because they train infantry people how to shoot.
Right. And I think that should be well noted in this. And whether Berkowitz is a serial killer or a member of a cult or a grander conspiracy to cause upheaval in the city of New York in the late 70s, he has the tools, he has the ability, and he has the training to make it happen. Right.
So, but even having said all that, I'm still stuck on his choice of weapon. But even saying all that, if you want to believe Berkowitz was a killer and sick, and that's what caused all this to happen, I would say whatever made him make that jump has not happened yet.
Right.
because if it did, he would have taken some action when he was in the military because the opportunity presented itself.
Exactly. I definitely agree with you on that.
So he comes back,
He comes back. He doesn't come straight home. He goes to Fort Knox in Kentucky. And while he's there,
which
he,
is a bizarre place to be assigned in the first place. I mean, I don't know how many people you know have been to Fort Knox.
I've never been there.
No one's been there.
Okay.
Not a lot of people go to Fort Knox. It's a very secure facility. It's more secure now than ever.
Uh-huh.
At that time, they believed there was gold that I don't even think we came off the gold standard yet. Nixon hadn't done it yet. And whatever you want to say to that extent.
So he ends up in a behavioral health facility there. That I know. He also gets very much into religion, but not that of someone with the last name Berkowitz, which is a Jewish last name. And, he had Jewish parents, and even his biological mother was Jewish. He becomes a Bible thumping Christian, street preaching in the area, and doing it in a very, I would say, Southern type of way. Think mega church, screaming, yelling, very animated. I guess you could say, maybe he's going crazy, but where he's at, where he was in Korea, things start to get a little bit weird. I'm still trying to find the newspaper article, but one of the gentlemen that ran that mental health facility in Kentucky, helped get it going, is implicated in some form of mind control and MKUltra type stuff. That doctor ends up in Westchester and has a behavioral health facility in Westchester at the time that David Berkowitz comes back to New York. That same doctor, and I'm gonna have the name for you guys at some point very soon, was one of the first. He was one of the first funders of Jim Jones' original church. If people don't know who Jim Jones is, I think that would take you for a wild ride. But essentially, he was involved in creating a church that ended up basically, suiciding itself on an island somewhere. Was that South America, something like that, Jonestown?
So Jonestown, I thought it was in Africa, but so what had happened is he had this religious church. It was in San Francisco, and he was a very powerful man. Everybody listened to. Finally, the government, kept saying would not let him have. He bought like a farm and all these things. So he decides to move everybody to I think it's in Africa, a place in Africa where he's going to fund this church. And basically, to cut to the chase, if you don't know, so there's thousands of people that go with him.
Yeah.
And he gives them all Kool-Aid laced with cyanide,
Right.
and they all die.
Exactly.
And the government doesn't want to tell us about it when it happens right away because it was just a couple of days before Thanksgiving. But we find out that some of the people died, but not like all of them died. Very few lived, and there were politicians involved trying to stop him, CIA, whatever. So they go, and people ran away and died because everybody drank the Kool-Aid. That's where the expression comes from.
Yes.
He drank the Kool-Aid because they did, and then people see other people dying, and they all end up dying. He commits suicide, and we're left with the mystery of this mass murder,
right?
So to speak.
And this program to kill type stuff that he has written in letters to, I guess, I think it was to one of the detectives that were working the case. It just, that adds up too much for me. When you start taking a lot of this stuff into account, where he was, the LSD, Korea, Fort Knox, behavioral health facility, becomes a street preacher. There are people involved in this behavioral health facility that were involved with Jim Jones' first church. Just it gets a little icky. I don't know, and maybe I'm just an easy mark for this type of stuff, but how is it possible? Make it make sense to me.
Well, you can't really make it make sense. It's either the hugest coincidence, and we've seen a lot of coincidences in life, in history, a lot of things. People dying on the same day is strange, but we all live in the real world, right? So
Right.
what we say to ourselves, is it possible that someone who worked for the CIA program MKUltra and taught people theoretically to how to assassinate people?
Yeah.
It's always and there were a group of doctors there, and strangely enough, some of those doctors had interactions with the assassins that killed John Lennon, that killed Robert Kennedy. So there are those doctors that are out there, and they seem to be associated with assassins that worked in this MK Ultra program.
Exactly.
And it's basically the Manchurian Candidate, for any of the yous know the story or have ever seen the movie. If you're going to watch the movie, don't watch the one with Denzel Washington, watch the one with Frank Sinatra. And basically, it's a takeoff of these Chinese and Korea. Matter of fact, in North Korea, they did a lot of it where they brainwash people and program people to become murderers.
Right.
That it's almost, think of a person being hypnotized, and there's a trigger. And in the movie, I think it's the Queen of Hearts. And it's a card, and when they get it, they go and shoot the person that they're programmed to shoot, and they have no recollection of it afterwards.
Right. And I mean, that's obviously not true with Berkowitz. I could say that with honesty, right? Like he knows what he did. He's admitted
Right.
to doing some of those murders to some people, and he's admitted to doing all of them to other people. But I still have an issue with the way in which he murdered people. When we were talking offline last week or 2 weeks ago, whatever it was, you mentioned, and I think you're right. I said to you, I said, you know, in the profile of a serial killer, it's usually up close and personal, strangulation, knives, some form of torture, whatever. And Berkowitz chose a weapon like a 44 Bulldog to shoot people and run away and not even really enjoy the murder itself. But as we're talking and you're bringing up assassinations and how people are programmed to do it a certain way, it almost feels like a lot of the people that were either murdered or injured in the Son of Sam killings, I guess you would call them, or Son of Sam era, it almost seems like assassinations are hits, not that of a serial murderer. And it's another thing that kind of has always gotten me asking more questions about Berkowitz and this case.
But there are some things that are similar, and that are, if you look back at assassinations, there's one person that gets caught,
Yep,
one person that they know that do it.
exactly.
That one person is never really investigated.
Right.
They don't investigate anyone else, and they find them. In this case, it's a little bit different because it went to trial, right?
No, it did not go to
Oh,
trial.
that's right. He pled
There was
guilty.
no trial, and there
But
was no
usually, he pled guilty.
right.
But usually, and he pled guilty after the doctor went to see him
Yep.
in jail that time, right?
Yes.
So, and originally he was not going to, and much to the dismay of his lawyer, he pled guilty. What also happens a lot in other assassinations is they don't even investigate anyone else. They're
Right.
either dead or they admit that they do it. And they
Right.
usually get either a psych out where they're proven crazy, or they plead guilty.
Right.
So there's no need for a public trial or anything like that.
Right. Now, exactly. And I'm just going to JFK for a second here because I think it kind of makes sense. Maybe might
Well, you could do Sirhan. Do you think they
right.
ever looked at anyone else?
No,
Matter of fact, they destroyed all the evidence, so you couldn't look at anyone else.
exactly. But if you look at JFK, Oswald was going to get interviewed no matter what because They knew Oswald was in the building that day, right? So there would have been some level of, hey, I want to talk to everybody that was in the building that day, right? We don't know who did it. We're just trying to figure out what people saw. In the case of Berkowitz,
but everybody they interviewed in the building said it wasn't him. He
Right.
wasn't there. I saw him on the stairs. He was in the back room.
Right,
so
right,
they went,
right,
okay,
right,
so we're
yeah.
not going to interview anybody in the building anymore. And he wasn't arrested for killing the president.
No.
He was arrested for killing Tibbet.
Yeah, exactly. And, you know, with Berkowitz, they had no idea it was even him. None. They didn't think it was him. They weren't looking at a David Berkowitz. They didn't even, I don't even think they were looking at somebody in Yonkers at that time.
They had no idea who was doing it.
They really had no idea. They had no leads. You know, there were a lot of, you know, I think for that time period, a lot of cockamamie, you know, opinions on who it could be or what type of person it could be. And guess what? David Berkowitz, when he got arrested, he gave them exactly what they wanted to hear. And when he was talking to Abraham Sin, he was talking to Klauser, and he was talking to all these other guys, he was giving them exactly what they wanted to hear. He wasn't a
That's significant. That he constantly wants to make other people happy. That's what people who are alienated from groups do. They try to be like, they want to befriend the people they're trying to court as some relationship to. That's what they do.
And he never, I don't think, would have even talked about any of this conspiracy stuff or this occult stuff unless someone like Amori Terry, who had at least, in the very least, had a knack for putting puzzles together and didn't really believe the official story and knew some of the other players in that area where Berkowitz was from. If he didn't say to Berkowitz, like, I have a feeling that there's more to this story, and this does happen through letters when Berkowitz is first arrested, I don't think we even ever have any inkling from Berkowitz that there was anyone else involved, right? It was open and shut.
So let's go back to our story
Yes, sir.
Just to cut back. So he's at
Fort Knox, right? Basically becomes an evangelical Christian at that time. People think he found faith in prison. He had faith. He found faith way before that. This is in this behavioral health facility started by this doctor. Again, I'm going to get the name. There's an article out there.
Okay, so is this facility part of the Army complex?
Yes.
So this is an Army facility?
Yes, this is an Army facility.
So think about the United States Army for a minute.
Right.
You're not going to get that therapy unless they say it's okay.
Right. Exactly.
So somewhere along this line, they decided, the Army did, that he needed behavioral therapy.
Right.
So the question is, did that happen in Korea or did it happen here?
So he didn't, his career in Korea, I wouldn't say was blemish free, but it wasn't like he wasn't some hero over there. I think he missed a pickup somewhere. He got lost in Korea. He was probably in a bordello or something like that, I would imagine, or partying and missed the bus somewhere. I think he was reprimanded for that. I haven't found anything that happened in Korea that would force him into the behavioral health facility in Kentucky, but who the hell knows?
I mean, all you need to say is, I want to hurt myself or somebody else.
Right.
Right.
Exactly.
That's all you need to say.
Well, maybe I don't know. You're saying that and that could be true. I don't know that, but I haven't found anything that I guess ignites the government's belief that Berkowitz needs some sort of mental help. Could have been because he started street preaching.
Had to be. Even if he said, which they wouldn't document, that he felt bad that he was responsibility for killing other people when I was in Korea or fighting a war or anything like that. They wouldn't have documented that.
Right.
Because they don't want people to feel bad for killing other people. That's what armies do.
Right. You're right about that. That's
you know what?
Good point.
And I'll give you something else. Maybe he wanted to kill people. Maybe he thought he was going to be able to do that when he joined the Army.
Right.
And maybe they didn't send him to Vietnam. You have to realize the thought process of the Army. Oh, you want to kill people? Oh, you're not fit to kill people.
Right.
If you say to the Army, I want to join the Army because I want to kill people, They don't want you.
Gotcha.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
There's something nobody should want to kill people. Maybe that's why they sent them to South Korea.
Right.
Maybe that's why during the Vietnam War, where they were sending infantry by the boatloads,
Yeah.
and maybe maybe sending a Jewish kid to Vietnam was sending a lamb to the slaughter kind of thing. But and not that there weren't heroes that were Jewish. I'm talking about some whatever. So so how does it come that he leaves Fort Knox?
He's honorably discharged. The only other thing that I find, very important to note about the Christian stuff there is that when he joins the church there, he joins every single group in the church. He is lock, stock, and barrel, heavily involved. Again, I think there's some contradictions in this belief that Berkowitz was, this antisocial, you know, perfect with a bow on it serial killer. This guy wanted relationships. He wanted interpersonal relationships. He wanted to get close to God. He wanted to join the military. He made these decisions. So if he's just a social outcast that eventually can't handle the world and has this burning desire to just kill people for no reason, why is he also trying to get involved in community organizations, church groups, putting himself in a position to be with other people and to create this social, maybe to get close enough with them to kill him? Okay, fair, fine. But
Oh, I don't think so. I think that goes to the point is that he wasn't a frustrated about life and he was going to kill people. He did things everyone else did.
right,
When they felt like they were alone, they searched out groups that they could befriend and maybe meet other people and move forward in life.
exactly.
I think his function, but
And I
when he
also
gets
think, I think the desire to be a part of the group is a perfect mark for a Jim Jones type who's running a Jonestown, right? You have people that want to be involved with something. They want to be involved with something bigger than themselves, whether it's an auxiliary police department where you're donating your time to make a better community, or joining a church group to and spread the word of God, you know, or joining the military and in a war effort that, I guess, was on everybody's mind back then. In all these cases, he's doing something bigger than what he is, right? It's bigger than himself. So if there is an occult angle to this case, he's the perfect person for a leader of a cult, or someone involved in a cult, to say, hey, you got to join this thing, man. We're doing all this cool stuff in the woods. We're this great group of people. We're having sex. We're doing drugs, and we're learning all this cool stuff about like esoterics or religion. That's not what we grew up knowing. You know what I mean? I think he's the perfect mark for that. And when you add in that they're gonna bring, if you bring Armageddon, right, or create this, it kind of makes sense in my opinion. I think it could go either way. I mean, what do you think?
so it's funny. I've kind of seen throughout these profiles that you get these assassins that or doctors associated with these assassins that worked in the government, and especially the doctors, whatever they do, they never get prosecuted.
No, I know.
Whatever they do, they're on the outside because no one wants anybody looking at MKUltra. No one even knows what it is about at that time anyway.
Right.
So you would think if you don't say, you got me, they're never going to be prosecuted. Look at the guy that who tried to kill, who's just prosecuted. The guy who was trying to kill Trump in Florida at his golf course.
Yeah.
He'd been arrested 70 times.
Right.
Never went to jail. Never a prosecution, nothing. 70 times. How do people like that not get prosecuted? Because they have some relationship to somebody, whether it's an organization or an agency of power. So, this doctor that he goes to see, obviously he's inside the United States Army. Maybe they're just searching out people for their own purposes, and maybe Berkowitz didn't serve that purpose enough.
And he was like an MKUltra flunky.
Yeah, but he he wasn't a good assassin,
Right.
and in his mind, he wanted to prove to them that he was a good assassin. He went out there killing people.
Who knows, you know? But I
Anything's
mean,
possible.
he was in the infantry. He did learn how to, I'm sure, you know, get downwind and do some damage. At least he had the training for that, right? I mean, what is the infantry used for? They're the first guys to hit the, I mean,
They're-
they're the if they're pawns, but they're very well trained pawns, right? How do we
What is
infiltrate a jungle and fight a war,
what does Patton
fight a
say?
battle?
You don't win wars by dying for your country. You win wars by making some other dumb schmuck die for his.
Yes,
So
right.
so that's it is. So, anything is possible to that. Certainly there are so many questions regarding the army and how it is and what happens when he gets out and his relationship to the doctor. I do find it strange that the doctor ends up coming to Yonkers.
Yep.
So he gets out. Where does he go first when he gets out?
He comes back. I think he ends up back in he ends up back in, I think, Co-op City for a second or two
With his dad or something?
with his dad. Yes, but I think the father helps him rent an apartment on Barnes Avenue in the Bronx. At this point,
I need you out of my house, crazy man.
Yeah, right. Well, yeah. I mean, there was a lot. He came home with this, with this new religious identity, and his father was a Jewish guy. He really didn't love it, right? The father was getting closer to retirement age. He was making plans to get out of the Bronx. He had this son come home from the military. Father helps him get an apartment on Barnes Avenue, and David Berkowitz does all the things. He gets a job. He enrolls in college. He starts to ask questions about, where he came from. And he's starting to become a man, and I think it's a pretty normal thing to take place when you come home from something, right? Whether it's college or the army. If you're coming home, you're going to try to build a life, right? I mean, especially in that era, I think there's far more people living home until they're 30 now than there were back then. I could be wrong, but it was time for him to be self-sufficient, I would imagine.
But you know what? Too, that era was the rise of men showing their feelings for the first time in history in America.
Right.
Men, war was there. You were supposed to feel bad about being part of the military. You were supposed to feel bad if you had, you were bit by bit by bit, you were, listen, the left and the right aren't the way they were today as they are today.
Right.
But there was a big divide between the left and the right, hawks and doves, liberalism and conservatism.
Yep.
Nixon was no longer president, but in whenever it was 74, 75, he'd already been out. You had you had Ford in there trying to cover everybody's tracks. And then you had Jimmy Carter.
Yep. And, this is, I think, New York City starting to go through their own upheaval as well.
Right. So this is all happening at once. He's in the Bronx, right? He goes to college a little bit, Bronx Community College.
Yes. Goes to Bronx Community College. He's telling, hindsight, I have to go forward to go back because a lot of these stories that we're telling about his life are coming from his tales to the Abrahamsons of the world and stuff like that. So in this time period, he's saying that he's starting to feel abandonment and stuff of that nature because of his newly found religious beliefs. A lot of his friends from Co-op City, who he wasn't supposed to have, stopped talking to him because he's becoming overbearing with the Jesus talk. His Jewish father is at retirement age, and his son comes home as a Christian evangelical, And, his father decides to leave, retire. And that's where I think Berkowitz really starts to find himself alone. I think
So
that is,
let's think about it for a minute. He's living in a vacuum, right?
yeah, he's
He
alienated
was
himself.
he was in the military where you don't eat, go to the bathroom, or shower without somebody's permission, right?
Right.
And you're doing it with large groups. You're going to church that you're associated with. You're a member of all these communities. So you have this rich and full life. Now you're going to get out. You're going to go back home, and you think all these things are still going to exist. And all of a sudden, bam, you're back with the same old man who didn't like you in the first place, right?
Exactly.
He doesn't want any part of you because he wants to move on with his life. You're an anchor around his neck. All these things. And now he's by himself living in an apartment. And he has no relationships, no community, and nobody to tell him when to eat and when to go to bed.
Right. And apparently, during this time period, by his own admission, he's setting fires all over the place, meaning he's very much into fire. He likes to set fires. And this is something that is definitely stuck with me for a while, but there is an element of him being a complete psychopath if he's just an arsonist. Like that, I'll never understand. I don't know why he's doing it. Uh, it's documented in a lot of his journals and a lot of his discussions with a lot of different people after he was caught and he's becoming, I guess, profiled. And that's one thing that I just don't really understand. I mean, he does have a penchant for that. The one, this is really interesting, and it's a little bit off the beaten path a little bit, but when he comes home, there is a major fire in Westchester County. It's the Gulliver's nightclub in Portchester, New York.
Oh, yeah, it was big time, right?
So 24 people died that day. It was, major news. And it was a weird spot in Portchester where no one knew whose jurisdiction it really was. Was it Portchester or was it the town of Greenwich in Connecticut? It was like in this like weird spot, where like who took care of this, right? The person that they arrested was this guy named Peter J. Leonard, or Peter Leonard, who apparently was in the bowling alley next door and robbed, I think, a vending machine, which is so funny you brought that up earlier. And the idea was that he robbed the vending machine or the bowling alley, and in order to cover his tracks, he decided to start a fire, which ultimately was the fire that burned Gulliver's to nothing and killed 24 innocent people who were just out there to see a rock band, I think, that night. Basically, with that case, Peter J. Leonard, he gets convicted, but the case gets overturned because it's apparent that him admitting or giving his statement was coerced. The craziest thing about David Berkowitz and fires and this Gulliver's file is that it all happens at the same time. He comes back to Westchester and the Gulliver's fire happened. Now, you would think that Gulliver's is just like this local spot in Portchester, only Portchester and Greenwich people go to, but people went there from all over the county and even further to go see bands and hang out and meet girls and girls to meet guys and so forth. I'll never be able to prove it. I know it's a little wild, but I always, in the back of my mind, and I've seen it in notes of other investigators, did David Berkowitz, during his arson years, start the Gulliver's fire?
So it's interesting. It's interesting you say that. So there's also another possibility, right?
Right.
The possibility that he sees it, he's around it, whether he was there or not, and he sees all the attention that it gathers.
Yeah.
And he's already has this propensity for fires, right?
Right.
So now he says, you know what? Look at this guy. He didn't go to jail. He got off. He set the fire. He became famous. All these things went around. And maybe that's a good idea. Maybe I could do that.
Right. But also,
I mean, it's also possible he started the fire. Don't get me wrong.
I know, but here's the thing. But the even crazier part is he's also alienating himself from his family and from his friends in Co-op City because he's thumping the Bible.
Right.
So like, it's like, I don't know how to make any of it make sense, but
Well, because he's alienated him, because now he's got this new path and he's on the path. He doesn't want to go back because he doesn't want to be wrong.
right.
Like no one wants to be wrong.
So mid 75 starts to roll around, and Berkowitz, as I've stated earlier, kind of wants to figure out where the hell did he come from. He knew he was.
Can I just say one more thing about the fire thing?
Yes, sir.
So it's funny. When I was a kid in high school, I had a bunch of friends, not friends, but people I went to school with. I remember sitting in a class, and we were all in the same class, who joined the fire department. And one of them became like a provisional person, didn't really get in. They didn't think there was a need. All of a sudden, there became all these fires that start popping up around town. I grew up in a small town in New Jersey. And this is a little meek kid. Like he'd been in my classes since I'm 5. And we were maybe 13 or 14. It turned out it was him.
Yeah.
He was setting the fires
So
because he wanted to be a fireman.
Because he wanted to put him out. And I think part of that is true about Berkowitz earlier on in his life when he was setting fires around Co-op City. He was a part of the police auxiliary unit and the fire patrol there. So I think what he was trying to do during that time period was exactly what this kid you're talking about was doing. Was he was setting the fires because he knew he'd get a call and he'd be able to go put it out. You know what I mean?
And back then, they didn't really prosecute kids like that.
Right.
I don't think they knew what to do with the kid.
Right.
I remember he was still in class and everyone's like, he's the guy that set those 5 fires.
Right. There you go.
In class. And you're like, what? Him can't tie his shoes. You're like, wait a minute. And this guy's planning an arson. He was like a little meek kid. He was tall and thin, but I remember he was meek at best.
When I was in my late teens, I was not a good kid. I got in a lot of trouble, and my father and I were in court often because of that. And this was kind of towards the end, and I was kind of straightening myself out at that time. But
that's going to pay you back at some point, right?
Oh yeah, 100%. And we're waiting in Harrison Court. This is back when Judge Vosch was sitting as the judge, and court would start like 11 o'clock. You know what I mean? You'd have to be there at 9, so you'd be waiting there. And it's Harrison, New York. I'm from Portchester. I know everybody, right?
That's right.
One of the guys that's there is a kid, a little bit on the slower side, but a part of the whatchamacallit, the volunteer fire department in Portchester. And I'm sitting there, I'm like, what are you doing here? Like, this is not a guy that gets in trouble. He goes, well, I was like, what? He's like, they said I was starting leaf fires. I said, how did they figure that out? He's like, well, because I would go put them out. So
I'd be the first guy there.
Right, exactly. So I know that this sort of stuff happens. I know that
all the time.
Right.
Listen, fire is engaging. When we used to go camping, I'd build these gigantic fires so much that you couldn't sit by the campsite. We all had to sit outside because it was too hot.
Sure.
I'd burn all the firewood. Everyone would be mad at me. I didn't really care. And we all used to sit there. Be careful when you stare at the fire. You might jump in. I mean, there's a power. It's like a fire, right?
Right.
And you give birth to it in a way. So you start it, you this, what that. And I mean, I still start fires because I have a smoker that burns on wood, and I still do that. And running the fire is the most difficult part of the process. But it's interesting. Fires are very powerful.
Yeah.
And that's all we hear stories, and brush fires are the thing you hear about. Fires are very powerful. So it's entirely possible a frustrated guy who wants to start fires. All right. So we're in the Bronx.
Yep.
We're trying to burn it down.
Exactly. Mid 75. Berkowitz is still on Barnes Avenue, figuring his life out. He decides he wants to find his biological family. And he finds them, meets them. He was never told exactly why he was adopted. None of this is out there, right? Nat and his original adopted mother don't tell him what happened. But he tracks down his family. He meets them and, he finds out, why he was adopted. And I think it was a lot for him. And I think this is where you can unequivocally say Berkowitz is at a loss. And I think his psychological well-being is 100% affected by it. He finds out he was born out of wedlock. He finds out that, his mother, obviously didn't want to, have an abortion, but she also didn't want to raise him because of, I guess, the context in which he was conceived.
Well, it was probably illegal to have an abortion at that
Well,
point.
you know what? You're probably right about that, actually, and I didn't even think about that. But she had the baby. She put the baby up for adoption, and the rest was history.
Right.
So I think that takes a toll, and I think that is kind of where a pretty big switch happens. He's alienated because of his newfound religious beliefs. He's probably trying to make something out of himself, but having some difficulty. He hasn't caught any momentum in life, right? And he now finds out that, his birth wasn't, one of happiness, I guess. He does develop a relationship with these people. I will say that. But it's during this time period where he also meets Michael Carr. He meets Michael Carr on Barnes Avenue at a party the same time period. Same time period where he finds out about his, birth. And who is with Michael Carr when Berkowitz meets him? Pratsky, the wandering bishop, the gay wandering bishop.
That he knew from Co-op City.
From Co-op City, exactly. And that's how you connect the two. There were three main areas for occult type congregations. Pelham Bay Park, which was not far from Co-op City in the slightest. Van Cortlandt Park in the Bronx. And Untermeyer Park in Yonkers. What I've been able to take from...
So by that, you mean these are three known areas
Yes.
of where occult happenings took place?
Yes, 100%.
Okay.
Pelham Bay Park was the epicenter for the beginning of David Berkowitz getting involved with the occult, meeting Michael Carr. Michael Carr is an interesting guy, and this is why I believe...
As previously noted, it's his sister that answers the phone
Yes.
for the answering service.
Exactly.
That says, I know Berkowitz, he lives next door to me, or whatever it is.
He's not being even in the least bit honest about how she knows him, why she knows him, and why there's any happening going on between the Carrs and Berkowitz when he gets to Yonkers. But
right. So anyway, back to where we were. I just want to bring everybody to connect that.
Exactly. And I want to make sure that we heavily connect the dot between Pratsky and Carr. Michael Carr was a nightclub going, Scientology, New Age, very handsome, was married to a female, but it is a well-known, I wouldn't say a well-known fact, but if you have a big enough brain between your ears, can realize that he was involved in the alternative type of lifestyle during that time period.
So it's possible he could have been bisexual.
Exactly.
So at that period, Scientology was spreading through the Bronx and New York City.
And we're going to get to something very, very important in all of this very shortly, but keep Scientology on the top of your mind is all I'm going to say, because it gets...
I remember my uncle, who was grown up in Catholic, went to Catholic schools. My mother's brother, my mother was going to be a nun, obviously she didn't. Like this deep religious Catholic Bronx.
Yeah.
One day he came over to my house. and they were Scientologists.
Yep.
And everybody in his area were switching with the demise of the Catholic Church in a way
Yeah.
of it, and having their eyes open to Scientology.
Right.
So it was a big thing during that period. This is the exact period we're talking about, or just prior to that, actually.
Yep.
It was early 70s.
And, I think it's important to note that L. Ron Hubbard was very close with, you might have to edit this out because I'm drawing a blank right now, but L. Ron Hubbard, who started Scientology, was very close with Jack Parsons. Jack Parsons was, like a rocket scientist out in California. They believe he opened up a porthole. He was very much into esoterics. They were both understudies of a guy who started the OTO, and the name is running away from me, so we might have to edit this out, please, because I don't want to sound like a complete moron, but I'm going to get you that name in a second. But it's kind of wild when you kind of figure out where Scientology comes from and some of the offshoots of Scientology. I'm going to just look this up real quick.
But we can
Anyway,
come back. We can come back to that.
We can come back to that.
Let's just talk about. So we have the meeting. They meet at this party. What happens then?
So this is more or less where, Berkowitz, in my opinion, gets involved with the cult. He goes from the light to the darkness. He obviously has a very good background as a Christian in understanding, the demonic other side of religion, right? Because as much as Christians talk about Jesus Christ, they also talk about the demons and the devil that is ultimately at war with the other side, right?
That war takes place on Earth and is alive and well in Christianity.
Exactly. In 1976, Berkowitz leaves the Bronx and moves to New Rochelle, also very close to Pelham Bay Park. In some respects, you'd probably say that might be easier to get to Pelham Bay Park from New Rochelle than it would be from Barnes Avenue in the Bronx, right? You're just going a little bit further south. You go north, but you're going, go to south to get to Pelham Bay Park. It's a little bit easier.
Right.
Maybe back then it was. He moves to New Rochelle. It's around this time where he starts working for the Postal Service. And
of course he does.
In the Bronx, right, of course, right? As I think a mail sorter. But what happens next is he moves further away from where he gets his new job at the U.S. Postal Service to Pine Street in Yonkers, which is basically right next door to the Carr's house. Pine Street building just basically looks right down at the Carr's home. This is where Michael and John Carr and Lee Carr all live at the time, by the way. And their home sits on the old Aqueduct Trail. So from their house, you could take the trail directly to Untermeyer Park. It's a long walk, don't get me wrong, but it sits on the trail that takes you to Untermeyer Park.
So tell me about the Aqueduct Trail. Tell me what it is, Aqueduct Trail.
So the Aqueduct Trail, I think, runs along the Old Army Post Road or the Old Albany Post Road. There are a lot of, I think, old pipes and stuff like that to move water up, move water from, I guess, New York City, I would assume. I don't know much about the aqueduct in that respect, but I think since it's now defunct, the state or the county or maybe the city and the county decided to create these bike and walking trails, for people to use for leisure. And these trails that are all throughout Yonkers and Westchester County, they go through all these different parks. Untermeyer Park is one of them. Van Cortlandt Park is another.
So I just looked it up. The Old Croton Aqueduct Trail.
Yes.
It's 26.5 miles. It ends at the Croton Dam in Croton on the Hudson and Van Cortlandt Park in the Bronx.
Yep.
It's made of crushed stone, dirt, grass, and gravel, which is now, and it, I mean, it's not a skimpy trail by
No.
any thing. I mean,
No, and there
there
are offshoots
are
of that trail too. That trail goes in zigzags on other sides of the county as well, I think. I mean, I think there's multiple ways you can use it. And, I lived pretty close to it at one time. I mean, it's great for biking, it's great for walking, it's great for just getting into nature when you're in the middle of a city like Yonkers, which even in a lot of the residential areas is very much like a borough of Manhattan. There's not a
right.
lot of you're not seeing much other than cars and concrete. You know what I mean? So if you want to get out of that, you could go on that trail, and I honestly I love it. And I found a lot of solace on that trail. In my time living in Yonkers, I'd walk miles on it. You'd see all types of deer and sometimes coyote and birds, and you just don't feel like you're in Yonkers anymore. It's a nice thing to have, actually. But Berkowitz in '76 decides to move closer to that trail, and you know
And farther away from his job.
further away from his job. And most people didn't move to Yonkers. Now, I have a friend that has recently sat down with Berkowitz 3 or 4 times in the last year or so. And, he is, Berkowitz doesn't love to talk about all this stuff, but he'll give you tidbits here and there. And he asked him flat out, "Why'd you move to Pine Street?" And he said, "For 2 reasons. I had a view of the Hudson and the cars were right there." They were his friends. And that is probably the most important part of this timeline, in my opinion, because the way he's described in the papers and the way he's described in all these profiles and so forth, there's another contradiction or another half truth or untruth, which is that Wee Carr was being antagonized by some wild man that lived on Pine Street. It's not the case. They knew each other. They all knew each other. Why that wasn't admitted at one point or another is wild. And if anyone wants to say there's no way that Pratsky or Carr knew each other, fine. But there are just too many similarities. They both were a part of, a different lifestyle from other people. Pratsky created the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, spent time in the Russian Orthodox Church to get away from the Vietnam War. He was a known club guy, Studio 54, this, that, and the third. And you have Michael Carr, same element, same type of people. And he also had pseudonyms like, I think it was like D. Charnovsky, Russian Nobilism. These guys were into magic. They used to hang out at the Magical Child gift shop in New York City, which was the epicenter for, for esoterics and ritualistic magic and all that fun stuff that came out of the hippie movement. It's also where the Necronomicon was written. They were teaching esoteric classes there. And in my honest opinion, I believe when David Berkowitz was introduced to this, it was way more fun than Christianity. He wasn't alienated anymore. He had a group of friends. He was meeting women. He was meeting, he was a part of something. And honestly, the move, in my opinion, from New Rochelle to Pine Street in Yonkers, if you live in Westchester, I don't even know how you find one from the other. You're talking Long Island Sound to the Hudson River in a very obscure area of Yonkers. And if I would have never even gone there for any reason, and I lived in Yonkers for 12 years, unless I knew that that's where David Berkowitz lived. You know what I'm saying? It just doesn't add up. Coincidence, happen. I think we can all say that, but there are just too many coincidences here. And I think you can easily create a profile based on what he has said to people that professions are profiling. Or you can look at all this other stuff, the LSD use, the behavioral health facility, becoming a preacher, joining all these different groups, and then all of a sudden being alone, finding out his the history of his birth, being alienated because of the groups he's joined, and then finding this new group of people that he had some familiarity with on Barnes Avenue in the Bronx, and having somewhere to go and spend his free time with and be a part of something.
We've brought David Berkowitz up from birth to his first interactions with the cars. And that's like a place to end it
Yes.
and say, when we move forward on our next episode, we'll talk about what went on with the cars, or what we think went on with the cars, and how that affects Berkowitz, and then begin some explanations of what goes on with the shootings.
Exactly. And I also want to say that I cannot wait to get into the shooting of Harvey, Sam Carr's dog, because that's a doozy.
All right, well, we'll talk about that next time.
It's hilarious.
So it's just now we've have this interesting group of people.
Oh, and there's a lot
And
more.
and we will get into that next time. And if you think about it, you had this guy that put up for adoption. He's searching for his connection. He finds it. He's in the military. He searches. He finds it with church, with a psychologist, and he finds his connection to the army. He gets out. He's cast off by his parents. His father, who's left, he leaves him and goes to Florida. And now you have this guy who's searching for a connection again, and he makes an old connection and a new connection. And then, as he did prior, he moves next to it, and we'll take up where this connection goes and what happens next.
Yep.
All right.
Thank
Thank you so much.
Thank you
Great
very much.
job, Chris, as always.
Thank you.
Please, if anyone has any questions, ask. We will definitely answer them in the next episode. But I think we're an hour 40 minutes. I think
Yeah,
that's
this
enough
is
for
pretty
what.
long. I apologize, man.
I mean, I don't know. It needed to be done.
There's a lot.
I-
There's a lot
A
to
lot
talk
to
about.
do. So, and I can cut this into 2 parts if we need to. But
Okay.
for now, I think it's one story. I hate to do it. So
Yeah.
at one point, so this is it. Thank you, everybody, for listening. That's the end of part 2. We'll take it up in part 3, and we start examining the relationships post-meeting old friends and the cars.
Right.
All right. Thank you, everybody, for listening and watching. Please like and subscribe. We're available on Better Life New York. It's available on all major podcast services as audio, and also YouTube for video as well. All right. Thank you so much. Thank you, Chris.